Welcome to my bedtime history channel. This story may sound familiar at first, but if you stay until the very end, you may begin to see that the golden age of piracy was never really about adventure, treasure, or romance. It was about desperation, power, work, fear, and a radical experiment in human freedom. Chapter 1. To understand the men who raised the black flag, we must first examine the crushing machinery of the world they desperately left behind. The word pirate usually summons a very specific image into our minds. We picture a daring hero standing tall against the wind, a treasure map folded carefully in his pocket, and a chest filled with glittering gold buried deep beneath the sand of some forgotten island. We imagine a life consumed by thrilling adventure and defined by absolute, unbound liberty. Yet, the actual reality of the golden age of piracy was born from a place stripped entirely of romance. It was a world forged in the deepest furnaces of human desperation, built by men seeking to escape the terrible, humiliating conditions of merchant vessels and royal ships. Theirs was not a joyous rebellion, but a calculated defection from systemic misery. Tonight we will leave the cinematic legends behind and step onto the damp, salt-soaked timber of a real 18th century vessel. We will explore the surprising democratic systems these outlaws created, the tedious reality of their daily labor, and the psychological tipping point that pushed ordinary men to trade a long life of servitude for a short life of defiance. Our narrative does not begin with a fearsome captain or a bloodthirsty villain. It begins with an ordinary worker caught in an unforgiving global machine. Imagine that you are this person, a young sailor in the early 1700s whose entire existence is confined to a cramped, creaking wooden ship navigating the vast and indifferent expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. It is 2 hours before dawn, and you are already profoundly exhausted. You were woken not by the natural light of the sun, but by the sharp, unforgiving bark of a boatswain. Your hands are raw, covered in blisters that have healed and torn open again from endlessly hauling the coarse, salt-stiffened ropes that control the massive canvas sails above. The air surrounding you is frigid and heavy with ocean spray that never truly dries, chilling your very bones. Every muscle inside your back and shoulders aches with a dull, relentless agony produced by yesterday's labor, and the day before that, and every single day for the past 6 months since your ship finally left the safe harbor of Bristol. This is your routine existence on a merchant vessel. It is not a grand journey of discovery, but an endless cycle of backbreaking, monotonous work. You and your fellow sailors represent a tiny floating factory drifting across an endless desert of water where the demands of the job never cease, no matter the weather or the state of your health. You must constantly adjust the rigging, climbing high into the swaying masts with nothing but empty air and churning black waves far below. You operate heavy wooden pumps to expel the stagnant, putrid water that inevitably seeps into the belly of the ship. You scrub the wooden decks, you mend the torn canvas, and you coat the frayed ropes with thick tar. This maritime economy functioned as an early form of industrial exploitation, where human bodies were simply viewed as disposable tools necessary to move valuable commodities across the globe. The men who generated tremendous wealth for distant merchants and aristocrats were actively denied the basic dignity afforded to the cargo they carefully guarded in the dank belly of the ship. The psychological weight of this system demanded total conformity. To survive in such an environment, a sailor had to suppress every natural human instinct for justice, autonomy, and self-worth. Social pressure on board dictated that you keep your head lowered accept the cruelty as a law of nature, and never dare to imagine that a different societal structure could exist. For this ceaseless and dangerous labor, you are promised a miserable wage, and even that small payment is rarely guaranteed. As a merchant sailor, your financial compensation remains entirely dependent on the completion of the voyage. If the ship should sink beneath a storm, or if you perish from disease midpoint, your grieving family back home will receive absolutely nothing. Even if you manage to survive the harrowing journey and return to your home port, your captain retains absolute authority over your fate. A captain could easily invent arbitrary fines for perceived infractions, deducting your hard-earned coins for a misplaced tool or a moment of exhausted hesitation. Men often worked for an entire year only to return utterly destitute. The sustenance provided by your employers is often worse than the financial exploitation. Your daily ration primarily consists of hardtack, a dense biscuit made from flour and water-baked so thoroughly it resembles solid wood. It must be submerged in beer or stagnant water supposedly to become chewable, and it almost harbors small black beetles known as weevils. The meat assigned to the crew is either beef or pork that has rested in wooden barrels submerged in heavy brine for uncountable months. It is so saturated with salt that it demands hours of scraping and boiling before a man can swallow it. Meanwhile, the fresh water quickly turns slimy and green inside its constrained wooden casks. This abysmal diet, devoid of any fresh fruits or vegetables, inevitably invites the slow creep of scurvy. You have witnessed good men succumb to its horrors. You have seen their gums turn black, their teeth fall loose from their jaws, their old wounds mysteriously reopen, and their minds fracture under the heavy weight of simple, preventable nutritional starvation. Looming above the physical misery is the constant, suffocating atmosphere of arbitrary discipline. The captain of a merchant vessel functions as a dictator governing a floating island. His spoken word operates as infallible law, and his primary instrument of motivation is the lash. A simple whip can reduce a sailor's bare back to ruined, bleeding flesh over the smallest grievance. Arguing with an officer, responding too slowly to a command, or simply being disliked by the men in power form sufficient grounds for a public flogging. There exists no trial, no jury, and no process of appeal. There is only the sharp whistle of leather moving through the salty air and the brutal, searing pain that follows soon after. Yet, in a strange twist of fate, you might consider yourself somewhat fortunate because you voluntarily signed a contract, thousands of sailors trapped inside. The Royal Navy did not enjoy even that small illusion of choice. They were violently pressed into service, kidnapped from the dark streets of port towns, and forced to give their blood for a distant monarch. Within the naval fleet, the imposed discipline is often exponentially harsher, the daily labor identically brutal, and the overseeing authority even more uneachable. The pressed sailor also endures the added psychological terror of impending warfare, knowing that his world might suddenly explode in a shower of shredded timber and iron cannonballs merely to settle the political disputes of wealthy kings. The invisible chains of this system were forged from pure economic desperation. The men who manned these ships did not endure such humiliation because they lacked courage. They endured it because extreme poverty left them with absolutely no leverage. The ruthless hierarchy of the ship was merely a concentrated microcosm of the wealth inequality that governed the cities they left behind. Modern human life often shares strange echoes with this distant era. We frequently accept unfair systems, arbitrary authority, and the slow erosion of our time and energy because we feel trapped by economic necessity. The tension between seeking safety through compliance and desiring freedom through radical risk is a fundamental human conflict that the sailors of the 18th century knew intimately. This represents the total reality of your enclosed world. It is a space defined by constant physical exhaustion, rotten nourishment, stolen compensation, and unpredictable, sadistic punishment. Looking forward, your horizon offers nothing beyond an endless cycle of exploitative voyages until either the brutal sea or a silent sickness finally claims your weary body and erases your name from history. When understood within this suffocating context, the concept of piracy ceases to be a romantic fairy tale. It transforms into a quiet whisper passed between desperate men in the darkest corners of the ship. It represents a highly dangerous alternative, certainly, but it shines brilliantly as the only available door leading out of a system designed entirely to break you. In the heavy silence of the night watch, a desperate man might look out at the endless black water and wonder if a shorter life lived on his own terms is ultimately worth the price of his soul. Chapter 2. The moment of defection is rarely born from courage alone. It is usually the sudden realization that safety has become more dangerous than rebellion. The endless monotony of the open ocean is suddenly broken on a gray, bitter morning. As you stand shivering near the mainmast, squinting through the salt and mist, a strange sail appears on the jagged horizon. It cuts through the heavy waves with a predatory grace that your lumbering merchant vessel entirely lacks. A deep, unspoken tension immediately grips the exhausted crew, freezing every calloused hand in place. Your officers begin to shout, their voices stripped of their usual arrogance, now edged with a sharp, undeniable panic. They recognize the nimble silhouette of the approaching sloop, and they understand precisely what it portends. Yet, buried deep beneath your own instinctual fear, a different sensation begins to quietly awaken inside your chest. It is a small, dangerous spark of anticipation, a secret hunger for the impending disruption. The unknown vessel draws rapidly closer, its decks teeming with men who greatly outnumber your exhausted crew. A sudden blossom of thick white smoke erupts from the bow of their ship, followed almost immediately by the heavy, reverberating boom of iron. A solid cannonball skips violently across the cresting waves, passing just inches before your ship. It is the universal warning of the seas, demanding immediate and absolute surrender. Your captain is a man who weighs every decision in shillings and pence. He quickly calculates that his heavily insured cargo is not worth the price of his own blood. Though he has freely spilled yours for months, he swallows his pride and barks the order to strike the colors. As the merchant flag flutters weakly down to the deck, the atmosphere shifts from frantic terror to grim, suspended resignation. With expert precision, the pirate sloop maneuvers alongside your vessel, the wood groaning loudly as the two hulls grind together. Iron grappling hooks bite deeply into the wooden railings, and heavy hemp ropes secure the unwilling embrace. The invaders spill over the side, not as a chaotic, bloodthirsty mob, but as a highly organized, lethally efficient team. They move with a confident swagger that defies everything you know. You study their faces in the cold light of the morning. They are not monsters or demons. They are simply men. Their faces are weathered by the exact same ruthless sun. Their hands bear the identical calluses earned from coarse ropes. Yet, there is a profound difference in how they carry themselves. They radiate an intoxicating air of absolute freedom. unburdened by the humiliating deference required of ordinary sailors. Instead of unleashing immediate violence, a man steps forward who does not dress or act like a traditional captain. This man is the quartermaster, the democratically elected voice of the pirate crew. His voice is calm, direct, and strikingly respectful as he addresses your trembling crew. He explains that they have not come to slaughter poor working men. They seek only the wealthy merchants, cargo, and willing brothers. He lays out the offer clearly, without force or coercion. You may remain with your cruel captain, continue your miserable voyage, and return to the poverty and beatings that await you in England. Or you can step across the narrow gap between the ships and leave that wretched life behind forever. You can become a free man, entitled to an equal vote and a fair share of everything taken. The silence on the deck becomes suffocating as every sailor privately weighs his own soul. For most of your companions, the deeply ingrained fear of authority and the distant shadow of the hangman's noose prove too powerful to overcome. They stare at the wooden deck, choosing the familiar safety of exploitation over the unknown dangers of true liberty. But you cannot look away from the extended hand. You realize, in this suspended moment, that the pirates possess no desire to command unwilling captives. They are escapees from the same tyrannical system, seeking only those who will freely fight beside them as equals. The choice presents a stark philosophical contrast: a guaranteed long life marred by slow, agonizing misery, or a dangerous, potentially short existence that you finally and completely control. The decision does not require another breath. You and two other exhausted sailors step firmly forward, breaking ranks with the subjugated crew. A wide, knowing grin spreads across the quartermaster's weathered face as he gestures toward the boarding ropes. You climb slowly over the wooden railing, leaving behind the invisible chains of your old world, and let your feet touch the deck of the pirate sloop. One of your new brothers hands you a battered tin mug filled with cloudy grog. As the burning liquid slides down your sore throat, it carries the warm, intoxicating taste of defiance. You watch your former ship slowly drift away, taking your old identity with it across the gray water. You stand upon new timber, suddenly and terribly responsible for your own destiny. A man will gladly trade a lifetime of certainty for a single day of dignity when he finally realizes he has nothing left to lose. Chapter 3. True freedom is never a formless void. It is a deliberate architecture built by those who have suffered under the weight of tyranny. You stand on the swaying deck of your new ship, the sharp, sweet taste of watered grog still lingering warmly on your tongue. The initial surging wave of adrenaline and pure relief has slowly passed, replaced now by a quiet, lingering uncertainty filling your mind. You have successfully escaped the suffocating cruelty of your former captain, but a profound and dangerous question remains unanswered. How can a ship populated entirely by wanted outlaws, desperate thieves, and rebellious mutineers possibly function without tearing itself apart in the middle of the lonely ocean? The answer begins to materialize a short while later, as the morning sun burns through the ocean mist. The quartermaster, the very same man who calmly invited you aboard, gathers you and the other nervous new recruits together on the main deck. He reaches into his coat and unrolls a sheet of heavy, weathered parchment, its frayed edges darkened and worn smooth from endless handling by salty, calloused fingers. This single document, he explains with utmost seriousness, represents the absolute foundation of their entire society. These are the ship's Articles of Agreement, much more famously known through history as the Pirate Code. You learn immediately that this is not a rigid set of oppressive rules imposed blindly, from above, by a distant, uncaring king. On this floating island of wood and canvas, there exists no absolute monarch wearing a golden crown. Before any major voyage ever commences, the entire crew gathers together in an open assembly to passionately debate, argue, and finally vote on every single rule written upon this page. Every individual man, ranging from the highly respected captain down to you, the absolute newest recruit, possesses an exact and equal say in the governance of the ship. The captain himself is merely an elected official, chosen for his skill in navigation and war. And he can be swiftly removed from command by a simple majority vote if the crew deems his leadership lacking or cowardly. You have not merely joined a criminal enterprise. You have been welcomed into a functioning, radical, floating democratic republic. It is a concept so profoundly radical, so fundamentally contrary to the highly stratified and abusive world you just escaped, that it requires a long moment to fully comprehend. Back on the solid land of Europe, wealthy kings firmly believed they ruled by absolute divine right, and poor working men held no voice whatsoever in determining their own destinies. Yet here, lost among the rolling green waves, uneducated sailors and desperate fugitives have spontaneously invented a working model of liberty and equal representation out of pure survival instinct. The quartermaster begins to read some of the key articles aloud in a clear, booming voice, ensuring that every single man perfectly understands the sacred contract they are about to enter. First and most important, every man possesses an equal vote in the affairs of the moment. This means any major decision, whether to attack a specific heavily armed ship, where to sail next for essential provisions, or what specific punishments to hand out for severe offenses, is decided by the crew as a unified, deliberating whole. Second, the crucial rule of economics follows a strict, unforgiving logic that pirates referred to simply as no prey, no pay. You will receive no arbitrary daily wages, handed out grudgingly by a corrupt master, who might withhold them on a whim. Instead, your ultimate payment arrives as a fair, mathematically calculated share of whatever actual wealth is plundered from enemy vessels. The articles specify exactly how the future loot will be meticulously divided among the brethren, ensuring complete financial transparency and preventing any one man from greedily hoarding the acquired wealth. The elected captain might receive 2 full shares to fairly compensate for his advanced expertise, heavy responsibility, and tactical brilliance in battle. The quartermaster, serving as the dedicated representative and protector of the common men, usually takes 1.5 shares. Highly skilled individuals like the ship's surgeon or the master carpenter might also receive a slightly larger portion for their indispensable labor. But you, even as a common, unskilled sailor just joining the crew, are absolutely entitled to one complete, unaltered share of the treasure. There are no hidden deductions, no arbitrary taxes, and no deceitful tricks played with your livelihood. Third, there exist strict rules governing personal conduct, designed specifically to prevent the ship from descending into bloody, disorganized chaos. Any bitter quarrel or violent disagreement between 2 men must always be settled on shore with pistols or swords, because disruptive fighting within the crowded, highly flammable wooden ship would endanger the lives of everyone on board. Furthermore, there are to be no women or young boys allowed on board in disguise, a strict rule designed primarily to prevent romantic jealousy and sexual competition from violently fracturing the crew's essential unity and focus. Fourth, the burning candles and smoking oil lamps must be completely extinguished by 8 o'clock at night. You realize quickly that this is not a strict, overbearing bedtime imposed to control your personal leisure or limit your joy. It is a highly critical, life-saving rule concerning extreme fire safety. On a dry wooden ship filled from top to bottom with leaking barrels of black gunpowder and highly flammable tarred ropes, a single careless, drunken flame dropped in the dark could instantly doom every living soul on board to a terrible, fiery death. And then, the quartermaster reaches the most surprising and revolutionary article of all, a highly sophisticated system of financial compensation for severe injuries sustained in the heat of battle. This ingenious concept serves as their radical, early version of modern health insurance and disability welfare. A man who tragically loses his right arm in a violent boarding fight might be officially awarded 600 pieces of 8, the common Spanish silver dollar that served as the primary global currency of the boundless seas. The devastating loss of a leg might be judged worth 500 pieces of 8, while the irreversible loss of an eye might command 100. This significant amount of life-saving money was always paid out directly from the ship's communal treasury, before the rest of the plunder was ever divided among the healthy men. It acted as a deeply binding promise that your brothers in arms would never casually discard you back into poverty once your working body was permanently broken by the terrible hazards of their chosen trade. After slowly reading the final important stipulations, the quartermaster carefully lays the worn parchment upon the flat wooden lid of a large rainwater barrel. He looks deeply into your eyes, and then into the expectant eyes of the other new men standing beside you. This represents the final, irreversible step into their secret world. To officially join the Brotherhood, to claim its remarkable protections and accept its severe risks, you must physically sign the document, either with your scrawled name or simply by drawing a crude cross in dark, wet ink. You reach out and take the offered feather quill, dip its sharp point into the small clay inkwell, and deliberately make your mark upon the heavy, fibrous paper. By performing this simple physical action, you are entering into a deeply sacred, unbreakable contract with these desperate outcasts. You are swearing upon your own life to live faithfully by these written rules, to fight bravely beside your new brothers unto death, and to readily accept the severe, pre-agreed punishments should you ever break your solemn, binding oath to the crew. You have now formally and permanently severed every remaining tie to your miserable past existence. You are officially a full, equal member of the crew, endowed with the absolute right to cast your vote and claim your deserved share of any future prize encountered on the horizon. You have been fully integrated into a unique society of exiled men, a fearsome brotherhood ironically governed by laws that are vastly more fair, transparent, and humane than any legal system existing on the dry, civilized land you just left behind. It is a strange paradox of human history that the most authentic examples of democratic equality were often forged in the shadows by men whom the civilized world had labeled as the enemies of all mankind. Chapter 4. A society is defined not only by the laws it publicly writes, but by the physical claustrophobic spaces in which its desperate people are forced to survive together. With the formalities of the articles finally concluded, you take your first proper look around the vessel, seeing it no longer through the panicked eyes of a terrified captive, but through the calculating gaze of a permanent resident. This creaking sloop is your ultimate home now, the very same ship that ran down your old vessel, with such terrifying and effortless grace. You realize now exactly why this specific ship was chosen by these outlaws. It is not a massive, clumsy warship burdened by weight, but a lean, incredibly fast vessel transformed from a simple workhorse into an apex predator of the sea lanes. Your new crew has already made severe, practical modifications to the ship's original architecture, stripping away anything that does not serve the ultimate goal of survival and plunder. You see considerably more cannons resting heavily on the main deck than any honest merchant vessel would ever dare to carry across the ocean. Their heavy black iron muzzles stare blankly out from newly cut gunports, silently promising swift violence to anyone who might resist your approach. The decks have been ruthlessly cleared of any unnecessary clutter to make ample room for fighting, transforming the entire ship into a hardened, lethal weapon. If you close your eyes, for a brief moment you can simply listen to the overwhelming symphony of your new existence, a soundscape defined by constant tension and release. You hear the deep, relentless groan of the ship's internal timbers flexing against the sea, sounding much like an exhausted old man's heavy, endless sigh. You hear the rhythmic lapping of the dark waves against the wooden hull, a relentless, hypnotic sound that will accompany you through every single day and night. Above you, the thick canvas sails snap sharply like gunfire as they suddenly catch the shifting wind. The olfactory landscape is just as overpowering as the auditory one, coating the inside of your lungs with the scent of a harsh, unforgiving world. The clean, sharp scent of the cold salt spray mixes heavily with the pungent, almost medicinal aroma of black tar, which is liberally used to waterproof the ship's vulnerable wood and fraying rope. This tar smells of burnt earth and chemical preservation, a scent that will soon embed itself permanently into your skin and hair. But the true, beating heart of this floating community does not reside in the fresh air of the upper deck. The true core of your society waits for you down below, hidden away in the claustrophobic gloom of the hull where the sunlight seldom reaches. As you climb carefully down the steep, slippery wooden ladder into the shadows, a thick, uncomfortably warm, and exceptionally heavy air instantly envelops your body. This is the 'tween deck, the main living quarters for the entire pirate company, a place completely devoid of comfort or elegance. There are no private cabins down here, absolutely no dividing walls, and no locked doors to offer even a fleeting moment of blessed solitude. This single, low-ceilinged wooden cave is where you and perhaps 80 other rough, desperate men will constantly eat, bleed, dream, and sleep for the foreseeable future. You see endless rows of discolored canvas hammocks slung tightly from the thick, heavy overhead wooden beams. They are hung so incredibly close together that you can easily reach out in the pitch dark and accidentally touch the arm of the man sleeping suspended right next to you. The extreme lack of space imposes a brutal intimacy that strips away all pretenses of personal status or individual separation. You soon learn that the hammock itself was a brilliant practical innovation that hardened sailors willingly adopted from the indigenous peoples of the Americas after enduring uncountable bruised nights. It sways gently and naturally with the constant, unpredictable rolling motion of the ocean, acting as a brilliant shock absorber against the tremendous violence of the sea. By suspending the men in the air, the hammock effectively prevents you from being violently thrown to the hard, wet wooden floor during terrifying storms or sudden course alterations. It becomes the only true sanctuary a pirate possesses in this chaotic world. The air trapped down here, in the belly of the ship, represents a highly complex and deeply unpleasant mixture of concentrated human odors that never truly dissipates. It smells intensely of unwashed bodies baking in the humid heat, the lingering scent of stale spilled rum, the musty odor of permanently damp wool and lingering black powder. Yet, beneath all of these surface smells lingers something vastly more foul and pervasive emanating directly from beneath the very floorboards you stand upon. This putrid, sour stench reaches from the bilge, the very lowest and darkest section of the ship's internal structure. The bilge is a terrifying, inaccessible void where all the stagnant seawater that inevitably leaks through the wooden planks slowly collects in the dark over many long months. Rotting food scraps, spilled beer, dead rats, and every conceivable form of human waste inevitably wash down into this hidden abyss, creating a sloshing, highly toxic soup. As the ship rolls heavily in the waves, this vile concoction churns and breathes out methane and decay, permeating every single inch of the surrounding timber. It becomes the defining, inescapable scent of your new floating home, a constant reminder of mortality and filth. In this cramped, humid, and foul-smelling environment, you finally and completely understand that the modern concept of personal privacy has been entirely erased from your daily life. You will now exist within mere inches of dozens of other heavily armed, highly stressed outlaws who possess extremely quick tempers and unforgiving memories. You must learn to constantly control your frustrations, to ignore the grating habits of others, and to suppress your own annoyance simply to maintain the delicate peace. You are no longer a solitary individual navigating the world. You are a single cellular component of a much larger organism. This overwhelming, inescapable intimacy explains exactly why the pirate code you just signed demanded such extremely strict and severe rules against unregulated shipboard fighting. In such a highly pressurized and claustrophobic space, where men cannot simply walk away to cool their flaring tempers, violent conflict poses an existential threat to everyone. Even the smallest disagreement over a stolen crumb of bread, a perceived personal insult, or a misplaced tool could instantly ignite a disastrous, bloody riot if not perfectly managed. The quartermaster's role as a peacemaker is not just about absolute fairness. It is absolutely vital for keeping the ship from destroying itself from within. This psychological adaptation does not happen instantly, but requires a slow, conscious rewiring of your deepest human instincts and previously held social boundaries. You must learn to find quiet solitude entirely within your own mind, building invisible mental walls since physical barriers do not exist here, in the dimly lit belly of the ship. The men around you have mastered this silent art of dissociation, existing peacefully, side by side while privately harboring their own vast internal worlds, hidden fears, and unspoken regrets. You are surrounded by unrelenting noise and motion, yet everyone unspokenly respects the silent sanctuary of the mind. As your exhausted eyes finally begin to adjust to the inescapable gloom, you notice the small, personal touches these wanted men have cultivated to retain their fleeting humanity. A carved wooden pipe resting gently on a barrel, a finely stitched leather pouch holding a few precious letters from a forgotten home, or a scratched piece of polished bone used as a good luck charm. These tiny, insignificant objects represent the crucial anchors that keep these radical defectors from completely losing themselves to the sheer brutality of the open sea. They are violent predators above deck, but fragile, nostalgic humans below it. You quietly locate a small, unclaimed, empty space hanging precipitously between two heavy iron cannons and are briefly shown how to properly sling your own canvas hammock by a nodding, silent crewmate. You carefully tie the thick ropes to the heavy iron rings bored into the overhead timbers, testing the tension to ensure it will adequately support your exhausted body weight. You carefully climb into the canvas cocoon, feeling the rough fabric press against your shoulders and back, offering the first small measure of genuine physical comfort you have experienced since the sun rose this eventful morning. As you finally lie back into the gently swaying fabric, suspended above the dark floor, you listen closely to the internal symphony of the enclosed space around you. You hear the rhythmic, labored snoring of exhausted men who have temporarily escaped their waking fears through deep sleep. You hear the endless creaking of the wooden hull as it battles the invisible pressures of the sea. Outside, a constant reminder of the fragile barrier between breathing and drowning. And you hear the distant, muffled roar of the unforgiving ocean rushing relentlessly, just mere inches beneath your resting head. You find yourself staring up at the dark wooden planks of the ceiling, deeply reflecting on the bizarre turn your life has taken in the span of a single day. You have traded one kind of prison for another, exchanging the heavy chains of economic servitude for the confined architecture of rebellion. Yet, despite the horrific smells, the absolute lack of privacy, and the constant physical proximity to dangerous outlaws, a strange and unprecedented sense of belonging begins to settle into your weary bones. You are no longer a disposable tool serving a wealthy merchant who utterly despises you. In the suffocating darkness of the lower deck, surrounded by the heavy scent of unwashed men and stagnant water, you finally realize that you have traded the vastness of the ocean for the intimate, inescapable embrace of a strange new brotherhood. Chapter 5. The greatest enemy of a free man on the open ocean is not the warship on the horizon, but the crushing, inescapable weight of boundless time. You wake to the gentle, rhythmic rocking of your canvas hammock as the faint, gray light of dawn slowly filters down through the wooden grates above. The ship is already alive, with the muffled sounds of men stirring from their slumber, preparing to face another day lost in the blue expanse. The pressing question that formed in your mind last night is about to be answered. What exactly does a pirate do all day? You quickly realize that a life of piracy is not a perpetual state of thrilling action or lazy leisure, spent waiting for a golden prize to magically appear. A wooden ship operates as a highly complex, constantly degrading machine, and it demands relentless, exhausting attention simply to remain afloat. Your entire existence at sea is now strictly governed by a relentless schedule known as the watch system. The crew is equally divided into two halves, ensuring that the vessel is never left unattended for even a single moment. Your specific watch stays on active duty for 4 continuous hours, followed by 4 exact hours of rest, creating an endless, unyielding cycle that repeats throughout the day and the long, dark night. There exists no weekend reprieve, no holiday rest, and no escape from the rhythm. During your time on active duty, the physical labor feels remarkably familiar, yet the underlying motivation has radically shifted. The most vital task involves trimming the massive sails, constantly pulling on heavy hemp ropes to adjust their angle and catch the shifting wind with maximum efficiency. It remains a delicate, exhausting art, a continuous physical conversation held between the sweating crew, the heavy canvas, and the invisible air. Beyond sailing, the majority of your time is consumed by endless, repetitive, but absolutely vital maintenance. You spend countless hours sitting cross-legged on the hard deck with a heavy wooden mallet and a dull iron chisel, performing a tedious chore called caulking. You methodically hammer sticky, tar-soaked rope fibers known as oakum deep into the narrow seams between the deck planks to prevent the ocean from swallowing you. On other days, you are sent high aloft into the swaying rigging carrying a heavy wooden bucket filled with boiling black tar. You carefully coat the essential ropes, protecting the vulnerable hemp fibers from being completely destroyed by the relentless sun and the corrosive salt spray. You also vigorously scrub the decks using heavy sandstones, scouring away the slippery, treacherous green algae that constantly blooms in the humid sea air. Occasionally, you are assigned the lonely, hypnotic duty of standing watch, high above the deck in the crow's nest. From that small wooden platform fastened to the top of the mainmast, your view expands into an immense, unbroken 360-degree panorama of shifting blue water. Your sole responsibility is to stare intently into that utter emptiness for hours, searching for the slightest white speck of another sail. When your 4-hour shift finally concludes, you are promptly relieved by the other half of the crew. However, your designated time off watch does not equate to true leisure or relaxation. This brief window is when you must quickly consume your modest rations, sharpen your iron knives, wash your salt-stiffened clothing in a bucket of cold seawater, and desperately attempt to gather enough sleep to survive the next imminent shift. The physical tasks remain nearly identical to the crushing labor you endured on the merchant vessel, yet the psychological reality is entirely transformed. There is no sadistic officer screaming vile insults at your back, nor does the threat of the bloody whip hang over every minor mistake. The men work together with a quiet, synchronized efficiency, because they fully understand that this wooden ship is now their shared property. A meticulously maintained vessel sails significantly faster, vastly increasing your collective chances of catching a wealthy prize and successfully evading the Royal Navy. You are no longer toiling blindly out of deep-seated fear for a distant master who devalues your life. You are now operating as a vested shareholder in a highly dangerous enterprise, and the sweat you willingly pour onto the deck directly secures your own future fortune. In modern human society, men often feel profoundly alienated from their daily labor because the fruits of their exhausting efforts belong entirely to someone else. When a worker owns a meaningful stake in the outcome, even the most tedious, repetitive chore suddenly assumes a deeper sense of purpose and dignity. The pirates understood this fundamental psychological truth, transforming mindless drudgery into a form of communal preservation and shared responsibility. As the disorienting days slowly bleed seamlessly into one another, marked only by the ringing of the ship's bell and the relentless changing of the watch, you make a profound realization. The greatest immediate threat to your sanity on these long, stagnant voyages between targets is not a sudden violent storm. It is the vast, soul-crushing boredom that threatens to consume the minds of men trapped in an endless blue void. Men will gladly bear the heaviest burdens of labor without complaint, provided they believe their sweat is finally falling upon their own soil. Chapter 6. True authority is never granted without condition by those who have already bled under the lash of absolute power. As you settle into the monotonous rhythm of the daily watch, observing the men around you, a deeper question begins to occupy your quiet hours. How does a ship entirely populated by wanted outlaws and violent mutineers successfully govern itself without descending into perpetual bloodshed? The answer lies in a highly sophisticated, incredibly delicate balance of power that these uneducated men instinctively designed to prevent the return of tyranny. First, you must observe the man who holds the elevated title of captain. You notice quickly that he is treated with a profound, yet carefully measured, level of respect. He is the master sailor, the expert navigator, the single man who possesses the rare intelligence to read the complex language of the stars and the hidden currents of the sea. His primary responsibility is to guide the vessel and command it during the chaos of war. When a potential prize is finally spotted on the distant horizon, a remarkable psychological shift overtakes the entire crew. The relaxed, democratic atmosphere instantly hardens into a weaponized, unforgiving discipline. In that specific, adrenaline-fueled moment, the captain's authority becomes absolute and unquestionable. He dictates the precise angle of attack, the exact timing of the heavy cannons, and the critical moment to violently board the enemy ship. This temporary dictatorship represents a matter of pure, grim practicality. In the deafening roar and thick black smoke of naval combat, there exists absolutely no time for a philosophical debate or a measured democratic vote. The crew willingly surrenders their hard-won liberty for a few bloody hours, placing their total trust in his tactical brilliance to win the prize and keep them all breathing. They obey him because survival demands a single, unified mind. Yet, here lies the crucial, revolutionary difference between a pirate captain and a merchant master. The very second the battle concludes and the acrid smoke finally clears, his absolute dictatorial power instantly evaporates into the salty ocean air. He steps back from the dangerous edge of absolute command and seamlessly becomes a mortal man among equals once again. He retains his title, but his capacity for arbitrary cruelty has been completely stripped away. He cannot arbitrarily order a man to be flogged simply for a perceived personal insult. He cannot suddenly change the destination of the ship based upon a selfish whim, nor can he claim the largest portion of the fresh food for his own plate. If he consistently fails to locate wealthy prizes, or if he demonstrates cowardice during an engagement, the crew can officially depose him at any moment through a simple majority vote. The true, enduring power in the day-to-day existence of the ship belongs entirely to another figure. It belongs to the quartermaster, the man functioning essentially as the peace chief of the floating tribe. While the captain operates as the undisputed leader of the crew during warfare, the quartermaster serves as the steadfast advocate for the common men during the long stretches of peace. He is the elected shield, protecting the vulnerable from the inherent corruptions of leadership. His daily responsibilities are vast and deeply woven into the mundane fabric of shipboard life. He stands in charge of the ship's vital stores, meticulously distributing the daily rations of hardtack and precious water to ensure every single man receives his exact, equal share. If you suffer a bitter dispute with a fellow sailor over a stolen shirt or a gambling debt, you do not seek justice from the captain. You take your grievance directly to the quartermaster. He functions as the ship's impartial judge and measured jury, listening patiently to both sides before rendering a final, highly respected decision. Crucially, he is the only man authorized to administer physical punishments that the crew has democratically voted upon. If a man must endure the lash for breaking the sacred articles, it is the quartermaster, not the captain, who wields the whip, completely removing personal vengeance from the delicate equation of justice. You slowly begin to recognize the profound political genius underlying this unconventional system. It is a brilliant separation of powers birthed directly from the bitter, scarred memories of desperate men who had been treated like disposable animals by unchecked rulers. They granted one man the terrible power to lead them through the fire of war, but they granted another the absolute authority to protect them from that same leader in the quiet dark. They had built a floating republic because they deeply understood that the only safe place to store absolute power is by dividing it equally among those who suffer its consequences. Chapter 7. Even the most resolute mutiny cannot fully insulate a man from the absolute, unforgiving biology of the human body and the cruelty of the elements. As you successfully navigate the intricate social mechanics of the ship, a far more visceral and immediate question demands your attention every single day. What does this brotherhood actually eat? You quickly discover that the foundational diet of a free pirate looks depressingly similar to the grim, tasteless menu you forcefully rejected on the merchant vessel. The primary staple remaining is the inescapable hardtack, that rock-hard flour and water biscuit still heavily dotted with the moving black specks of burrowing weevils. The primary source of protein consists of salted beef or pork, cured indefinitely in brine barrels until the meat becomes so tough and overwhelmingly salty it resembles chewy leather. This is a diet engineered strictly for long-term preservation inside a damp hull, not for human pleasure or sustenance. Because fresh water stored in wooden casks inevitably turns slimy, green, and putrid within weeks, alcohol remains an absolute necessity for survival. The daily ritualistic ration of grog provides a fleeting moment of warmth, making the stale water palatable and offering a chemical escape from the monotony. Yet, here is where the pirate's radical independence provides a massive, life-saving advantage over the captive merchant sailor. Unlike a merchant ship bound by the strict financial deadlines of distant owners, a pirate vessel functions as the absolute master of its own time. If the ship's stores plunge dangerously low, the captain will not hesitate to alter course toward a small, uninhabited island. The crew gladly rows ashore, armed not with cutlasses for bloody boarding, but with muskets specifically for hunting. You spend an entire day tracking wild, feral pigs or goats through the dense, tangled jungle, a profoundly welcome relief from the constricting wooden boundaries of the ship. The slain animals are brought back to the sandy beach, where the crew constructions a large fire roasting the fresh meat over a wooden grill. The French pirates called a boucan, the pure taste of fresh, unsalted meat registers as a luxury so intense it feels like a royal feast. At sea, the men constantly trail handlines from the stern, desperately hoping to catch heavy tuna or dorado to share among the starving crew. However, the most prized catch in the Caribbean remains the giant sea turtle, easily captured while sleeping defenselessly upon the water's surface. A single massive turtle could adequately feed the entire crew, and remarkably, they could be kept alive, trapped on their backs, upon the deck for weeks. Yet the greatest feasts occur in the immediate aftermath of a highly successful capture. When you finally board a merchant ship, the primary prize is rarely the captain's iron strongbox, it is his locked pantry. Your crew descends upon his private reserves, with joyous, hungry cries, liberating casks of fine French wine, sacks of soft white flour, and highly coveted barrels of sweet sugar. That triumphant night, your cramped ship miraculously transforms into a floating banquet hall. The scent of roasting meat overwhelms the smell of tar, and you drink stolen brandy from battered tin mugs while singing defiant shanties. For a few fleeting hours, you truly live better than the aristocrats who condemned you. You are full for the first time in years, pushing the shadow of scurvy temporarily into the ocean. However, this occasional bounty offers absolutely no protection against the sudden, brutal violence of the sea or the carnage of naval combat. A slipped knife while working high in the rigging, a shattered bone from a tumbling fall, or the tearing impact of a musket ball are constant, terrifying realities. In the rigid world you left behind, a severely injured sailor was routinely discarded as a useless economic burden. Among pirates driven by a complex mix of brutal practicality and surprising brotherhood, the approach is radically different. A professionally trained surgeon represents a highly valued prize, often the only man a pirate crew might actively kidnap and force into service, because his specialized knowledge literally dictates the survival of everyone aboard. If no doctor can be plundered, the bloody role of ship's surgeon usually falls solely to the ship's carpenter. The grim logic remains utterly practical. The most common major surgery following a cannon engagement is immediate amputation, and no man aboard understands how to wield a saw faster or cleaner than the carpenter. Following a battle, the main deck quickly mutates into a horrific, makeshift operating theater. To prevent fatal gangrene from a shattered limb, the ruined flesh must be swiftly and violently removed. You would be forced to swallow a massive dose of rum or laudanum, offered a leather strap to bite, so you do not sever your own tongue, while your crewmates hold your thrashing body down. To halt the massive bleeding, the carpenter employs cauterization, pressing a red-hot iron or boiling tar directly onto the fresh stump. The stench of burning human skin and the agonized screams resonating across the deck serve as the inevitable, bloody aftermath of your democratic freedom. The survival rate remains horrifically low, but it remains marginally better than the absolute certainty of a slow, rotting death. It is in these moments of utter vulnerability that the true weight of the articles is tested, proving that their radical brotherhood extends far beyond just sharing the gold. Chapter 8. The vast, indifferent ocean does not respect rebellion. It only respects the precise, cold calculations of those who learn to read its hidden language. You now profoundly understand how your floating home is democratically governed, endlessly maintained, and medically sustained. Yet, all of these radical social achievements would prove utterly meaningless if the ship could not successfully navigate the formless void. In the seemingly endless expanse of the Atlantic, devoid of paved roads or permanent landmarks, the delicate art of navigation emerges as the single most vital intelligence on board. Making a minor miscalculation out here does not merely result in missing a wealthy prize. It guarantees slow starvation, maddening thirst, and being erased forever by the water. The crushing responsibility for this crucial intellectual task usually falls directly upon the shoulders of the elected captain. While the quartermaster rules the social fabric of the deck, the captain must master the complex geometry of the heavens. His instruments represent a fascinating mixture of crude simplicity and profound scientific ingenuity. His most prized material possessions are not chests of gold, but his heavily guarded nautical charts. These are not fictional treasure maps marked with a dramatic cross. They are precious, hand-drawn documents of parchment, often violently plundered from the lifeless hands of defeated merchant masters, detailing hidden reefs and invisible ocean currents. To comprehend your general direction, the navigator relies intently upon the trembling needle of the magnetic compass. However, knowing which way the bow points only solves half the mathematical riddle. You must also accurately measure your speed. For this essential task, the navigator deploys a clever physical device known as a chip log, tossing a weighted piece of wood over the aft rail into the foaming wake. Attached to this wooden chip is a long, coiled rope tied with evenly spaced knots. As the vessel plows forward, the rope rapidly unspools into the sea. By utilizing a small glass timer filled with fine sand, the navigator carefully counts exactly how many knots slip through his calloused fingers. This physical action gives birth to the maritime measurement of speed, still utilized by modern seafarers today. With speed and direction loosely established, the navigator must then calculate your latitude, your exact position north or south of the equator. Utilizing a complex brass instrument like a quadrant or an astrolabe, he measures the precise angle of the blinding sun at high noon or the gleaming north star in the black of night. This practice beautifully intersects brutal piracy with elevated astronomical science. Yet a terrifying unsolved mystery haunted every sailor during your era: the problem of longitude. There existed no reliable mechanical clock capable of surviving the damp, violent motion of a ship, meaning there was no scientific method to know exactly how far east or west you had drifted. The navigator possessed only an educated, highly anxious guesswork system known as dead reckoning to plot your true location. Because the mathematical tools were inherently flawed, a truly great captain also had to function as a master reader of the natural world. The subtle shifts in the deep color of the water, the specific breeds of seabirds circling the mast, and the evolving shapes of gathering clouds spoke a silent language. The captain translated these natural clues into life-saving intuition. When science inevitably reached its limit, day after exhausting day, you watch the unbroken line of the horizon, understanding now the immense intellectual pressure resting upon your captain's shoulders. His abstract calculations remain the only thread tethering your vulnerable brotherhood to the distant, unseen shore. The enduring boredom of the empty sea is merely the blank canvas upon which his navigational art must be flawlessly painted. Then, without warning, the hypnotic spell of the empty ocean is suddenly shattered. A sharp, electrifying cry rings out from the lonely lookouts stationed high in the crow's nest: "Sail ho!" The words ripple through the sweating crew, like a current of pure electricity. The long days of quiet maintenance are instantly over, and your ship rapidly transitions from a drifting republic into a focused, lethal predator. True mastery of the sea arises not from arrogantly conquering the waves, but from humbly learning to translate the silent whispers of the wind. Chapter 9. True violence is often prevented not by the application of overwhelming force, but by the psychological mastery of profound, paralyzing terror. As your nimble vessel rapidly closes the distance over the next hour, you notice a strange discrepancy hanging high above your head. Your ship is currently flying the honorable colors of the English nation. You soon learn that this calculated deception serves as the essential first step in the careful art of the oceanic hunt. The ultimate goal is to approach unseen, wearing a familiar and comforting mask. To the exhausted crew of the laboring merchant ship, you initially appear as nothing more than another friendly vessel navigating the same lonely waters. They harbor absolutely no reason to panic, their minds numbed by the heavy monotony of their own bleak existence. You use their ingrained assumptions against them, quietly stealing their only precious avenue of escape before they even realize they are being actively hunted. Then the tense moment for polite pretense completely evaporates. You have drawn close enough that the merchant ship now rests firmly within the lethal range of your iron cannons. Upon a quiet command from your captain, the false English colors swiftly tumble down to the wooden deck. For one suspended, heart-stopping moment, your towering mainmast stands entirely bare, leaving the enemy crew to wonder who truly approaches. A new bundle of dark fabric is swiftly brought up from below, attached securely to the halyard, and hoisted high into the wind. It is the infamous banner that has come to be universally feared as the Jolly Roger. This stark piece of cloth represents the most devastating weapon in your entire arsenal. Vastly more powerful and cost-effective than any iron cannonball or sharpened steel cutlass. In the silent, unforgiving language of the open sea, the color black traditionally signifies imminent death and mourning. By raising this specific flag, your crew is making a very clear, brutal promise to the approaching ship. It proudly announces that you consider yourselves entirely outside the jurisdiction of any earthly king, and that you will willingly employ extreme violence to claim what you have patiently chased. The terrifying symbols sewn onto the black canvas carry highly specific psychological messages. A grinning skull above crossed bones represents the universal inevitability of death. An hourglass warns the trembling captives that their time is rapidly running out. A bleeding heart pierced by a spear guarantees a slow and agonizing demise if they dare to offer even the slightest physical resistance to your imminent boarding party. You quickly understand the true underlying philosophy of this widespread theatrical display. Piracy functions strictly as a profit-driven business, and engaging in a bloody, prolonged battle represents terrible economics. A fierce fight results in severely damaged hulls, wasted gunpowder, and dead brothers who can no longer help sail the ship. The black flag exists specifically to convince the enemy that surrender is their only logical choice. When intimidation fails and a stubborn merchant captain foolishly chooses to resist, the psychological warfare instantly gives way to brutal naval tactics. Your expert helmsman deliberately maneuvers your swift sloop across the vulnerable stern of the enemy vessel, executing a devastating naval maneuver known as crossing the T. This perfect positioning allows you to unleash every cannon on your side, while they cannot return symmetrical fire. Your quartermaster shouts the final command, and your ship explodes in a deafening, rib-rattling roar of synchronized cannon fire. A thick, acrid cloud of sulfurous black smoke instantly blankets the swirling water. You are not firing solid round shot to sink them. You are firing spinning chain shot to tear violently through their canvas sails, effectively crippling their masts and paralyzing their ability to simply sail away. As the heavy smoke slowly clears, your helmsman brings your creaking ship directly alongside the stricken merchant vessel. Men stand ready at the wooden railing, clutching heavy iron grappling hooks attached to thick hemp ropes. They hurl the iron claws across the narrow, churning gap, biting deeply into the enemy timber. With a massive, unified heave, the two ships are violently ground together into a single battlefield. With a terrifying roar, you and a dozen other men swarm over the railings, a heavy pistol gripped in one hand and cold steel in the other. The ensuing chaos tends to be remarkably brief. The opposing sailors possess absolutely no desire to sacrifice their own fragile lives merely to protect the insured cargo of a distant, wealthy master who has consistently abused them for many months. the greatest victories are invariably won, not by the sharpness of the bloody sword, but by the complete surrender of the enemy's broken will. Chapter 10. Wealth acquired through violence is rarely saved because it must be burned quickly to erase the lingering shadow of mortality. With the captured ship secured and its demoralized crew subdued, the pounding adrenaline of the fight rapidly gives way to a highly focused, disciplined process. This is not the chaotic, greedy free for all you might have imagined from popular myths. The quartermaster assumes complete command of the prize, and the first absolute rule of piracy is strictly enforced. All plunder belongs entirely to the company as a unified whole. Any pirate caught secretly hiding, even a single silver coin or a small jewel for himself, faces the harshest democratically elected punishments. To steal from your own crewmates constitutes the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. The entire fragile system of mutual trust that holds the Brotherhood together relies unquestionably on every man remaining completely honest during this crucial stage. The quartermaster begins a meticulous, public inventory of the captured vessel. You quickly learn what true pirate treasure actually looks like in the cold light of day. It is exceedingly rare to find a heavy iron chest overflowing with Spanish gold. The genuine wealth resides within the mundane cargo itself. The dark hold might reveal massive wooden barrels of sweet sugar, bundles of aromatic tobacco, or precious indigo dye. These agricultural goods represent vast fortunes to the shady merchants waiting on shore. Beyond the raw cargo, the captured ship itself provides immense value to your ongoing survival. Heavy iron cannons, barrels of dry gunpowder, and coils of fresh hemp rope constitute vital naval stores that are incredibly difficult to acquire legally. Even the elaborate personal belongings of the captured officers, including their silver shoe buckles and finely tailored coats, are tossed onto the communal pile. Absolutely nothing of value is ever overlooked. Once the meticulous inventory concludes, your crew sails the heavily burdened ships toward a friendly, lawless port. You might arrive at a bustling pirate haven like Nassau in the Bahamas, a sprawling, chaotic settlement built directly upon the sandy beach. There are no paved streets, no royal governors, and absolutely no naval patrols to enforce the king's law. It is a temporary paradise built entirely out of stolen canvas and raw timber. Here, the quartermaster carefully negotiates the sale of the captured cargo, transforming heavy barrels of molasses into hard, gleaming currency. When the trade concludes, the most important ritual of your new life commences. The entire crew gathers, in anticipation, and the compensation fund is opened first. The man who lost his eye receives his promised 100 pieces of 8, proving that the sacred articles will always be honored above simple greed. Finally, it is your turn to step forward. The quartermaster counts out your single, full share of the divided prize and drops the heavy coins into your calloused palms. You suddenly hold vastly more genuine wealth than you could have possibly earned through 10 years of honest, backbreaking labor. In this staggering moment, the stolen silver feels like much more than simple money. It feels like absolute, undeniable independence. With your heavy pockets ringing, the call for shore leave is joyously declared. You wade onto the busy beach, plunging directly into the deafening noise of the crowded wooden taverns. The stuffy air is thick with roasting pork, dense tobacco smoke, and the sharp smell of raw, unwatered rum. Your hard-won share of the plunder now burns a metaphorical hole deep inside your pockets, demanding to be immediately released. A pirate spends his money as fiercely and rapidly as he earns it. In the dark corners of the tavern, you watch men recklessly wager a year's worth of wages on a single roll of carved bone dice. Men who readily risked their lives for each other yesterday now become bitter rivals. In games of pure chance, the disciplined order of the ship completely dissolves into a riot of hedonistic chaos. This extreme financial recklessness is born directly from their immediate proximity to death. The idea of frugally saving coins for a distant, peaceful retirement seems profoundly absurd to a man who might hang from a royal noose tomorrow morning. The underlying philosophy demands that you consume the present moment with maximum intensity. You purchase fine linen shirts, expensive pistols, and endless rounds of drink, desperately chasing the illusion of eternal merriment. Inevitably, the delirious celebration reaches its exhausted conclusion. You reach into your coat and discover that your pockets have once again been emptied completely. The immense fortune you bled for has evaporated into thin air, traded willingly for a few fleeting nights of absolute excess. With an aching head and nothing left to show for your bravery, you hear the quartermaster calling the impoverished crew back to the waiting ship. A man who truly believes he has no tomorrow will always spend his entire future tonight. Chapter 11. The most dangerous weapon employed by an empire is never the iron cannon, but the quiet, corrupting promise of forgiveness. As the delirious fog of shore leave slowly lifts, you notice a subtle, chilling shift in the atmosphere of the bustling pirate havens. Whispers circulate through the smoky taverns, carried by merchant captains and weary smugglers. The great European empires, having finally concluded their endless, bloody wars with one another, are no longer distracted. They have turned their unified, terrifying gaze toward the lawless expanse of the open sea. The authorities launch their campaign to eradicate your floating republics not with immediate violence, but with a highly calculated psychological strike. An official proclamation is issued from the distant throne of London, offering a full, unconditional pardon to any pirate who surrenders before a specific, looming deadline. It is a brilliant, insidious promise that all your past sins will be completely erased. This unexpected offer of amnesty acts as a corrosive poison injected directly into the heart of the pirate brotherhood. For older men, whose bodies ache from old wounds and whose nerves are frayed by constant paranoia, the pardon represents an incredibly tempting exit strategy. They desperately wish to take their meager earnings and simply vanish into the quiet anonymity of the colonial crowd. The unified, defiant front of the outlaws immediately begins to fracture. Yet, for the younger, more radical men, surrendering to the very same corrupt authorities, they originally fled feels like the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. They view the king's pardon as a deceitful trap, a desperate trick designed to disarm them before sliding the rough hemp rope around their vulnerable necks. Bitter arguments erupt on the crowded decks, pitting former blood brothers against one another as the terrifying reality of their dwindling options sets in. When the soft promise of the pardon fails to clear the oceans completely, the empires swiftly unleash the crushing, mechanical weight of their absolute military might. Massive Royal Navy frigates are dispatched to relentlessly patrol the vital sea lanes of the Caribbean and the rugged American coast. These are not the slow, clumsy, overloaded merchant vessels you have grown accustomed to bullying and terrifying. These specialized warships are specifically engineered for pure speed and packed from bow to stern with devastatingly heavy artillery. They are commanded by highly educated, ruthless naval officers and manned by rigidly disciplined, heavily armed Marines, who do not fear the Jolly Roger. Your nimble, shallow-draft sloop, once the absolute terror of the merchant routes, is utterly outmatched by the raw, organized violence of an imperial war machine. Along with these formidable warships arrive a new breed of highly motivated, aggressive colonial governors dispatched with a single, uncompromising mandate to eradicate piracy. They arrive in the heart of your sanctuaries, bringing the crushing force of the law directly to the sandy beaches you once ruled. But the most devastating, demoralizing tactic they employ is the deliberate weaponization of your own former brothers. The empires actively hire the very men who accepted the pardon, transforming legendary pirates into heavily compensated, government-sanctioned pirate hunters. These turncoats possess intimate, first-hand knowledge of every hidden cove, every tactical weakness, and every secret evasion route utilized by the Brotherhood, to be actively hunted and eventually slaughtered by the exact same men who once drank your rum shatters, the final illusion of your invincible rebellion. You can physically feel the vast, boundless world rapidly closing in around your creaking wooden ship. The safe harbors are systematically blockaded. The merchant targets are increasingly protected by heavy naval escorts, and the once unbreakable solidarity of your crew is plagued by deep suspicion. The absolute freedom you so desperately fought to achieve is slipping uncontrollably through your calloused fingers like fine, dry sand. A rebellion, built entirely upon the fringes of the map, must eventually collapse when the Empire finally decides to redraw the boundaries of the world. Chapter 12. The final chapter of a rebellion is rarely written by the rebels themselves, but by the survivors who slowly transform their bloody reality into a comfortable myth. The Golden Age of piracy, for all its terrifying fire and intense fury, represented a remarkably brief flash in the expansive pan of human history. For every desperate man who eagerly joined, the radical brotherhood, the unspoken, heavy question, always loomed in the back of his mind. How would this dangerous experiment finally conclude? There existed no single, universal path out of the shadows. The end of a pirate's career was a complex story with many possible conclusions, ranging from the swift and violently dramatic to the surprisingly quiet and mundane. For many fierce captains, the end arrived exactly as they had lived, wrapped in a chaotic flurry of choking black powder, blinding cannon smoke, and drawn steel. To perish in open battle was a constant, fully accepted occupational hazard of their chosen trade. In a desperate, close-quarters fight against a superior naval vessel, a pirate could be erased in a single instant, struck by a heavy lead musket ball or torn apart by the terrible spray of wooden splinters. The infamous Blackbeard, perhaps the most visually terrifying pirate of his era, met his absolute end in this exact manner, killed in a bloody, exhausting melee with Royal Navy sailors off the coast of North Carolina. For some hardened pirates, this soldier's demise was quietly considered a vastly superior fate compared to the ultimate shame of the executioner's rope. A final, violent act of total defiance in a life, lived perpetually on the razor's edge, felt deeply appropriate. However, another fate, vastly more public and intentionally brutal, awaited those who were finally outmaneuvered and captured alive by the unrelenting authorities. For the pirate who found himself heavily chained in the dark hold of a Navy ship, the path forward was swift, legal, and absolutely certain. He would be transported to a major colonial hub, such as Port Royal in Jamaica, where he would stand before a special admiralty court. There would be no sympathetic jury of his peers. For a known pirate, The brief trial functioned merely as a grim formality. The inevitable sentence was death by hanging, and the execution itself was engineered as a powerful, horrifying public spectacle. A massive crowd would gather near the waterfront to eagerly watch the final, struggling moments of the infamous outlaws. It was a visceral, bloody warning delivered by the Empire to any other exhausted merchant sailor who might be secretly tempted by the seductive whisper of a life lived free of rules. To ensure the message lingered long after the execution, the lifeless bodies of the most notorious captains were occasionally encased in heavy iron cages known as gibbets. They were left suspended at the entrance to the busy harbor, slowly rotting away as the tides rolled in and out. It was a gruesome, undeniable demonstration of the ultimate, crushing victory of imperial law over radical individual liberty. Yet for every pirate who met a highly dramatic, recorded end, it is overwhelmingly likely that many more simply walked away into the obscuring fog of history. This was the quiet path of the king's pardon. Faced with the rapidly growing, inescapable threat of naval patrols, countless pirate crews chose to pragmatically accept the official offer of amnesty, swallowing their pride to preserve their breathing lungs. They would sail their battered sloops into a designated colonial port, formally swear a new oath of allegiance to the distant crown, and in a single instant, their long list of violent crimes was legally forgiven. These thousands of now former pirates simply melted back into the fabric of ordinary society. For this silent majority, the Golden Age was not a fight to the absolute death, but a single, wild chapter in a long life. And what of the ultimate pirate dream, the quiet, luxurious retirement funded by a fabulous, hidden fortune? This specific narrative forms the very core of the legend, and for good reason. It was almost mathematically impossible to achieve. The pirate ethos of living intensely for today meant incredibly few men ever managed to hoard enough wealth to secure a future they never truly believed they would live to see. With the genuine, historical pirates permanently swept from the seas by the mid-1720s, their harsh reality immediately began to fade. The memory of the brutal working conditions, the monotonous, rotting diet, and the constant, gnawing fear was slowly replaced by something far more romantic and enduring. The transformation from an ugly historical reality into a thrilling, immortal myth began almost immediately, fueled by the public's insatiable hunger for escapism. In the year 1724, while a few remaining pirates were still being actively hunted, a massive bestseller was published in London, titled A General History of the Pirates, written under the mysterious pseudonym Captain Charles Johnson. This single book organized the chaotic, violent history of piracy into a collection of thrilling, highly dramatized biographies, permanently cementing the larger-than-life characters into the public consciousness. Over a century later, the brilliant Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson would take these exaggerated legends and distill them into his absolute masterpiece, Treasure Island. This single novel, vastly more than any historical record, is entirely responsible for constructing the modern myth of the pirate. Stevenson took the incredibly rare, isolated case of a buried treasure and made it the central, defining goal of all piracy. Stevenson also introduced the enduring archetype of the charming but treacherous pirate rogue, complete with a squawking parrot perched on his shoulder and a wooden leg. He cemented the dramatic, completely fictional concept of forcing captives to walk the plank, a theatrical invention that virtually no real pirate ever employed. Through the powerful magic of literature, the desperate, Starving, Sailor was forever transformed into a dashing, free-spirited adventurer. The actual desperate pirates may have only successfully ruled the vast seas for a brief, violent, and heavily romanticized generation. Yet their enduring legend, the incredibly powerful story of ultimate, unyielding freedom, radical rebellion, and a society functioning entirely without aristocratic rules, has proven to be absolutely immortal. It is a compelling narrative we continue to eagerly tell ourselves even today. We project our own intense frustrations with the rigid, exhausting systems of the modern world onto these distant, salty phantoms. The real story of piracy was never truly about glittering gold coins or romantic sword fights on the wooden deck. It was a profound, deeply human story about labor, desperation, and the immense, terrifying risks ordinary men will willingly take when pushed to the absolute edge of their endurance. Thank you for joining me on this long, immersive journey tonight. From the harsh, back-breaking realities of an ordinary sailor's life to the inevitable, violent collapse of their radical floating republics, our voyage through the shadows of history has finally reached its quiet end. If you found comfort and intrigue in our exploration of the past, please consider leaving a gentle like and subscribing to the channel to join us for future nighttime wanderings. Before you fully slip away into a deep and peaceful sleep, I leave you with one final, quiet thought to carry into the uncharted waters of your dreams. If you were guaranteed a long, perfectly safe, and comfortable life, but it required you to remain entirely under the control of someone who fundamentally disrespected you, would you eventually find yourself looking out at the horizon, waiting for the black flag to appear? Good night.